A billionaire stood outside a dying man's room and couldn't go in. Inside, a stranger held that man's hand. Night after night. 30 nights. The stranger was a woman who mopped floors for $16.85 an hour. The billionaire was worth $3.8 billion. Neither of them knew yet that one of them was about to change the other's whole life. Picture it. A man in a Brioni suit, frozen in a hospital hallway, watching a cleaning lady in thrift store scrubs do the one thing his money had never taught him how to do. But the reason she sat in that room had nothing to do with charity, and everything to do with a promise her grandmother made her swear to, a long time ago, in a language he would never understand. Stay with me. This is the story of Adeze Okonkwo, a wooden boat that fit in the palm of a hand, and the night a man with everything learned what it cost to have nothing. It was the third week of January in Cleveland, Ohio, and the cold had teeth. The kind of cold that comes off Lake Erie at 3 in the morning and finds every gap in your coat. Ada felt it the moment she stepped off the bus on Carnahan Avenue, the wind pushing against her like a hand on her chest. She pulled her scarf up over her nose. The scarf was thin. Most things she owned were thin by now. Her coat had a tear under the left arm she'd stitched closed twice. Her shoes were a half size too big because they'd been somebody else's first, and she'd stuffed the toes with folded paper towels so they wouldn't slide. She walked the 4 blocks to Carnahan Memorial Hospital with her head down, the way she walked everywhere now, like a woman trying not to be noticed. At 41, Ada had learned that being noticed in this country rarely brought good news. She clocked in at 11 at night. Her shift ran until 7 in the morning. 8 hours of buffing floors and emptying bins and wiping down rooms after the living and the dead had passed through them. The badge clipped to her chest said one word: Environmental Services. It was a polite American way of saying the person who cleans up what no one else wants to touch. What the badge did not say was that, in another country, on another continent, Adeze Okonkwo had spent 19 years as a nurse and a midwife. That in the city of Enugu, in the southeast of Nigeria, there were grown men and women walking around today because her hands had pulled them safely into the world. The badge didn't say any of that. In America, her 19 years were a piece of paper that didn't count. She had a checking account with $41.30 in it. She had a daughter named Chidinma, who was 11, and who was, at that exact moment, asleep in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building where the radiator banged like someone trapped inside the wall. Before Ada left for work that night, she'd stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched her daughter sleep. Chitty slept the way she did everything, seriously, her brow a little furrowed, one arm thrown over the cracked plastic case of her eyeglasses on the nightstand. The glasses had snapped at the bridge 2 weeks earlier. Ada had wrapped the break in white medical tape. Neat little turns of it, the way she'd once wrapped 1,000 things. When she'd handed them back, Chitty had pushed them up her nose and said very calmly, "They're fine, Mama. I can see everything." She could not see everything. Ada knew the prescription was a 1.5 years old. But Chitty had decided somewhere in that small, serious head of hers that her mother had enough to carry. So she carried what she could, an 11-year-old, deciding she would be no trouble. That was the thing that undid Ada if anything was going to. Not the cold. Not the bins. The sight of her little girl pushing taped glasses up her nose and lying to protect her. In her left scrub pocket, where some women kept their phone, Ada kept a small wooden boat. It was no longer than her thumb. A canoe, really, carved from a single piece of dark wood. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. The paint was long gone. There was a chip on the bow where it had been dropped, decades ago, on a hard floor a world away. The wood had gone almost black, where her fingers had worried it smooth over the years. Her grandfather had carved it. Her grandmother Nena had pressed it into Ada's hand the night before Ada flew to America. An old woman with strong fingers and milky eyes, and she had said the word she'd said her whole life. The words she said to every frightened mother on the birthing mat. The words that meant more than any of them. No one crosses the river alone. Nena had been a midwife too. In their village, when a woman's time came, you did not leave her. When a man was dying, you did not leave him. You sat. You held the hand. You hummed if there were no words left. Because the river between this life and the next was wide and dark and cold, and the one thing you could give another human being, rich or poor, saint or sinner, was the promise that they would not have to cross it alone. Ada touched the boat in her pocket and walked into the hospital and got to work. She wasn't supposed to talk to the patients. That was Dale Brunner's rule, the night supervisor for her department. A man who carried a clipboard like a weapon and had a saying for everything. "We clean rooms," Dale liked to say. "We don't run a daycare." But there were patients on the 4th floor who hadn't heard another human voice in days, and Ada had hands that remembered 19 years, and you cannot unlearn what your hands know. So she broke the rule in small ways. She fluffed a pillow that wasn't hers to fluff. She filled a water cup. She said good evening, and how are you tonight? And that's a cold one out there, isn't it? Small things. Things that cost her nothing but a minute she didn't officially have. Around 4 in the morning, when the floors were done and her real work was finished, Ada took her break in the cafeteria with Solomon. Solomon Mensah had cleaned the surgical wing for 11 years. He was somewhere in his 60s, from Ghana, with a laugh that came up from his belly and a way of making the worst night feel survivable. He always packed too much food and always, somehow, had extra. That night, he slid a foil package across the table to her without a word. Inside was jollof rice, still warm from his thermos, the smell of it rising up sharp and red and bringing tears to her eyes for reasons that had nothing to do with onions. "Eat, Sister," Solomon said. "You're disappearing." "I'm fine, Solomon." That is what disappearing people always say. She ate. He watched her the way an older brother watches, pretending not to. And when she told him quietly about the glasses, about the $41, about the letter from the building manager she hadn't opened yet because she already knew, Solomon didn't offer her money he didn't have. He just nodded slowly, and he said the thing she would carry into the rest of that long night. "You think God brought you all this way to drown you in the last river," he said. "He didn't. You just can't see the far bank yet." Ada didn't cry in front of him. She didn't complain. She didn't ask him for anything. She finished the rice, washed the foil so she could give it back clean, and went to start her second loop of the floors. But she held those words the way you hold a coal in winter, careful, both hands, because it was the only warm thing for miles. What Ada didn't know, as she pushed her cart down the silent 4th-floor hallway that night, was that the empty-feeling room at the end of the east wing wasn't empty at all, and the man inside it was about to become the most important stranger of her life. 40 miles east of that hospital, in a glass house above the lake, a man who had never in his life worried about $41 sat awake in the dark. Everett Lang was 55 years old, and by most measures he had won. He had built the Lang Hospitality Group out of a single mortgaged motel into a chain of resorts that competed, room for room, with the Mandarin Oriental. He had a Gulfstream that could put him in Singapore by morning. He wore an A. Lang & Son watch that cost more than the building Ada lived in. He had a Maybach and a heated garage and a Wharton degree on a wall he never looked at. And that night, with all of it, Everett Lang could not make himself drive to a hospital and walk into one room. Because the man dying in that room was his father, Walter Lang, a name Everett had spent 40 years trying not to say. Walter had walked out on Everett's mother when Everett was 7, left them in a rented 2 rooms with a hot plate and a window that didn't shut, and he had never looked back. Everett's mother, Marta, had crossed an ocean from a village he could no longer picture to give her son a chance, and she had paid for that chance by cleaning hotel rooms. Marta Lang had scrubbed other people's bathtubs for 30 years. She had worn a gray uniform and a name tag and a smile for guests who looked straight through her. And here was the part Everett Lang had never once said aloud, the part that sat behind his ribs like a stone. In the years when he was clawing his way up, when he was learning which fork to use and how to lose his mother's accent, and how to walk into a room of rich men like he belonged there, he had been ashamed of her. He had stopped inviting her to things. He had told a business partner once that his mother was in service and let the man assume she ran a company. And Marta, who had given him everything, who asked for nothing, had died in a county hospital on a Tuesday afternoon while her son was closing a deal in another city. She died alone. No one held her hand. No one hummed. By the time he landed, she was already 3 hours gone, and the nurse on duty told him gently that his mother had asked for him at the end. Asked, and waited, and crossed the river by herself. Everett had carried that for 30 years the way some men carry a verdict. So when the call came that Walter, the father who had abandoned them both, was alone and dying at Carnahan Memorial with no other living kin, Everett had done a strange thing. He had gotten in the car. He had driven to the hospital. And then, every night for almost a month, he had stood in the doorway of his father's room and found he could not step inside. He didn't know if he wanted to forgive the old man or scream at him. He only knew that the sight of a dying parent in a hospital bed had cracked something open in him that he'd spent his whole life sealing shut. Here's something most people don't see. Across this country, there are tens of thousands of people who are doctors and nurses and surgeons in the places they came from, and who now drive cabs, stock shelves, and clean floors, because their training doesn't transfer, and the path to recertify costs money they don't have. We call it a labor shortage in one breath and waste a hospital's worth of skill in the next. The woman down the hall from Walter Lang's room, the one with the mop, had delivered more babies than half the doctors on that floor. Everett Lang had no idea. Not yet. He stood in that hallway in his $1,000 shoes, and he watched. And on the 30th night, he saw her go into a room 3 doors down, a room he knew held an old man with no visitors. And he watched her pull a chair to the bed of a complete stranger, and take that stranger's hand and begin very softly to hum. If you've ever wondered whether one quiet person can move someone who has everything, keep watching. Because what happened next started with a wooden boat, and it ended somewhere none of them could have guessed. The first time Ada pulled a chair to Mr. Lang's bed and stayed, it was an accident. She'd gone in to empty the bin and found him awake at 2:30 in the morning, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a man who has run out of people to call. The little white card slotted by the door said only one thing: W. Lang. No flowers. No cards. No photographs propped on the windowsill the way other rooms had. Just an old man and a heart monitor and a window full of black sky. Cold night, Ada said, because it was the thing she always said. The old man turned his head. His eyes were pale and wet and surprised, as if he hadn't expected to be spoken to. They keep it like a freezer in here, he said. So she got him another blanket. That was all. One blanket. But the next night she came back, and the night after that, and somewhere in the 3rd or 4th week, the bin emptying became something else. She would finish her floors, and on her unpaid break, the half hour that belonged to her and to no one else, she would sit with Mr. Lang. She'd straighten his sheets. She'd hold the cup while he sipped. She'd tell him small things about the cold, about Solomon's rice, about a daughter who pushed taped glasses up her nose and said she could see everything, and the old man, who it turned out had a great deal to be sorry for and no one left to say it to, would listen. And once or twice his eyes ran over and he wiped them quickly with the back of a spotted hand and pretended it was the dryness in the room. She didn't ask what he'd done with his life. She didn't ask why no one came. Where Ada came from, you did not interrogate a man at the river's edge. You just made sure he wasn't standing there by himself. What she didn't know was that someone had started counting her visits, and someone else had started counting them too for a very different reason. Dale Bruner found out on a Tuesday. He found out the way men like Dale always find out, by looking at a badge swipe log and seeing a pattern that didn't fit the paperwork. Environmental Services badge, entering room 42012. 11 minutes here, 26 minutes there, night after night, in a room that took 4 minutes to clean. He pulled the camera footage. He watched Ada sit. He watched her hum. And what Dale Brunner saw was not a nurse with 19 years in her hands. What he saw was a liability. An untrained employee, alone with a patient, off the clock, doing things that were not in her job description and that the hospital's insurance did not cover. He was waiting by the time clock when her shift ended at 7 in the morning. You want to tell me what you're doing in 422? Ada's stomach dropped, but her face didn't move. She had learned over the years to keep her face very still. He was cold, she said. I'd brought him a blanket. For 26 minutes, he had no one, Mr. Brunner. That's not your problem to solve. Dale tapped his clipboard against his leg, twice the way some men crack their knuckles. You're housekeeping. You're not a nurse, you're not a chaplain, you're not family. You go into an occupied room, you clean it, and you leave. You don't sit. You don't touch the patients. You don't get involved. He said the word involved, like it was something stuck to his shoe. I'm writing you up. Second strike in a month. That's a suspension. Pending review. Pending review, Ada repeated. 3 weeks. Unpaid. 3 weeks. Unpaid. She did the arithmetic before he'd finished the sentence. The way she did all arithmetic now. Fast and silent and merciless. $16.85 an hour. 40 hours a week. 3 weeks. Gone. She thought about the letter on her kitchen table. The one from the building manager. The one she'd finally opened. $940 a month, and she was 2 months behind, and the letter used the word vacate. She thought about the $2,300 it would take to even sit for the nursing exam that would let her stop pushing this cart. She thought about taped glasses. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. Not there. Dale walked her out himself, the way you escort a problem off the premises, and at the edge of the parking lot, in the gray 6 o'clock dark with the snow coming down in. Fat, wet flakes, the wooden boat slipped out of her scrub pocket. She heard it before she saw it, a small dull knock against the asphalt, and then it was gone, swallowed into the slush. Ada dropped to her knees. She didn't care about the cold soaking through her pants, or about Dale watching from the doorway, or about how it must have looked a grown woman on her hands and knees in a hospital parking lot at dawn, raking her bare fingers through dirty snow. She found it under the rear tire of somebody's Buick. She closed her fist around it. The chip on the bow had a new scratch now, pale against the dark wood, and she pressed it to her mouth and stayed there on her knees for a moment, breathing. Then she got up, got in her own car, a Honda with 210,000 miles, and a heater that took 10 minutes to think about it, and she drove 3 blocks, and she pulled over, and finally, where her daughter could not see her and Solomon could not see her and Dale Brunner could not see her, Ada Okonkwo put her forehead against the steering wheel and wept until there was nothing left. When she got home, Chitty had already made her own breakfast and packed her own lunch and was standing by the door in her coat with her taped glasses on straight. You look tired, Mama. I'm fine, dear. The endearment her own mother had used. My own. Long night. Chitty studied her the way she studied everything, then reached up and patted Ada's arm twice, like a small, grave adult comforting a larger one. It's okay if it's not fine, she said. You don't have to do the smile for me. Ada had to turn and pretend to look for her keys. Now, here's the part of the story that the badge swipe blogs and the write-up forms could never show. Because while Ada was on her knees in the snow, a man had been standing 30 feet away the whole time, behind the tinted window of a Maybach idling in the visitor lot, and he had seen all of it. Everett Lang had come at dawn, the way he sometimes did, to sit in his car outside the building that held his father and fail, one more time, to go in. He had watched the supervisor walk the cleaning woman out. He had watched her go to her knees for something he couldn't see, and he had felt, with a force that frightened him, that he was watching his own mother in a parking lot 30 years too late. He didn't know the woman's name. He didn't know that she'd been the one sitting with his father every night that he himself could not. He only knew that he could not stop thinking about her, and that the not stopping had become the loudest thing in his very quiet, very expensive life. The hospital felt different without Ada in it. Renee Castellano noticed it on the second night of the suspension. Renee had worked the night shift on 4 East for 9 years, and she knew things the day staff never saw. The small ecosystem of who comforted whom when the lights went down. She knew the cleaning lady from Nigeria sat with the old man in 42012. She knew the old man had been sleeping better for it, and she knew that the old man had started declining the moment the visit stopped, the way a plant turns when you move it from the window. She also knew about the other one. The man in the suit. He had started showing up around the same time Ada's visits had, and his routine never changed. He'd arrive late, take the chair in the alcove across from room 422, and sit there for an hour, sometimes two, with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the door he never walked through. The first week, Renee had assumed he was a lawyer. The watch alone could have paid her salary for a year. But lawyers didn't look the way he looked at that door. Lawyers didn't sit in a hallway at 1 in the morning like men keeping a vigil for something they'd already lost. On the fourth night of the suspension, Walter Lang asked for the woman. "Where's the lady?" he said to Renee, his voice thin as paper now. "The one who hums." "She's not here right now, Mr. Lang." "Is she coming back?" Renee didn't have the heart to tell him the truth, which was that she didn't know, so she said, "I'll see what I can do," and she meant it. She found Ada's number in the staff directory, and she called it on her own break, breaking a few rules of her own. And when Ada answered, Renee told her two things. She told her the old man in 42012 was failing and might not have many nights left, and she told her about the man in the suit who sat outside his door but never went in. Ada was quiet on the line for a long moment. "Why won't he go in?" she finally asked. "I don't know, honey. Some people, the closer they get to the door, the more they can't open it." Ada understood that better than Renee could have known. She thought about her grandmother on the birthing mat, about the village, about every threshold she'd ever helped a frightened person across. She thought about a man dying 12 feet from his own son, both of them alone, with a wall of years between them that nobody knew how to climb. "Where I am from," Ada said slowly, "we have a saying. No one crosses the river alone. My grandmother said it to me my whole life. It does not matter who you are. It does not matter what you have done. When your time comes to cross, someone should be holding your hand on this side." She paused. "I am suspended. I am not allowed in the building. If I come and they see me, I lose the job for good." "I know," Renee said. "But he asked for me." "He did." Ada looked across the kitchen at her daughter, asleep again on the couch with a library book open on her chest, taped glasses folded on the cushion beside her. She looked at the letter that said vacate. She looked at the wooden boat sitting on the table where she'd set it down, the new scratch on its bow. "No one crosses the river alone," she said again, quieter, like a decision. "If you've ever had to choose between doing the safe thing and doing the right thing, knowing the right thing might cost you everything, then you already know what Ada did next. Stay with me. Because the next 20 minutes would change 4 lives, and not one of them in the way you'd expect." She went back that night. She wore her own clothes instead of scrubs, a coat with a torn lining and a scarf over her hair. And she came in through the side entrance the smokers used, the one without a camera, and she took the stairs to the 4th floor so she wouldn't pass the desk. Her heart was going hard. If Dale Brunner saw her, it was over. But the hallway was empty and dim. Just the hum of machines and the far-off beep of someone else's heart keeping time, and she slipped into room 422 like a woman slipping into church. Walter Lang was very small in the bed now. His skin had gone the color of candle wax, and his breathing came in long, uneven pulls, the kind Ada had heard many times before, the kind that meant the river was close. She pulled the chair to the bed. She took his hand, cool and light as a bird, and his eyes fluttered open and found her, and something in his ruined old face eased. "You came," he said. "I told you I would come. They said you weren't allowed." "I am allowed by something older than them," Ada said, and she smiled at him, and she reached into her coat pocket and took out the little wooden boat. She pressed it into his open palm and closed his thin fingers over it. "My grandfather carved this. My grandmother gave it to me. Where I come from, when someone has a hard journey ahead, you do not send them empty-handed. You hold the boat. You are not alone, Mr. Lang. You hear me? You are not crossing alone." And she began, very softly, to hum. An old song. A song from the birthing mat and the deathbed. Both, because in her grandmother's hands, they had never been so far apart. She did not hear the door. Everett Lang had come to the hallway that night the way he always came, expecting to fail again, but the chair in the alcove was where he'd left it, and the door to 42012 was open a crack, and through it came something he had not heard in 30 years. A woman humming to a dying man, and before he understood that his feet were moving, Everett Lang crossed the threshold he had not been able to cross for a month, and he stood inside his father's room, and he saw her. The woman from the parking lot, on her knees beside the bed, holding his father's hand, holding a small dark something against the old man's palm, humming the way his mother used to hum, in a uniform that had been somebody else's first. Ada looked up and froze, a stranger in a suit that cost more than her car, standing in the doorway with tears running openly down his face and making no move to wipe them. She thought absurdly of Dale. She thought, "I'm caught, it's over." She started to rise. "I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to be here. I'll go." "Don't." His voice broke on the one word. "Please, don't go." He came to the foot of the bed. He looked at the old man, at the wooden boat in his hand, at the woman who'd put it there, and when he could speak again, what came out was not the voice of a man worth $3.8 billion. It was the voice of a 7-year-old in 2 rented rooms with a window that didn't shut. "He's my father," Everett said. "I haven't been able to walk in here for a month, 30 nights. I've sat in that hallway 30 nights, and I couldn't make myself open the door." He pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. "And you don't even know him. You're not getting paid. They suspended you. I watched them throw you out. And you came back anyway. You came back for a stranger." He looked at her, and the next words came out of him like something torn loose. 30 years ago, my mother died in a hospital exactly like this one, and she asked for me at the end. And I wasn't there. Nobody held her hand. Nobody. She crossed alone because her son was ashamed of her and too busy getting rich." His shoulders shook. "And here you are, doing for my father what I couldn't do for her." The room was very quiet, just the machines, and Walter's long, slow breaths, and the boat in his hand. "Now, there's something worth knowing here, and then we'll go right back, because it matters. Studies of hospital deaths find that a startling number of people die with no one beside them, no family, no friend, just staff who are too overworked to stay. And researchers have found something about the rest of us, the watchers. When we witness a genuine act of kindness, something measurable happens in the chest, a lift, a warmth, and it makes us more likely to go and be kind ourselves. They call it elevation." Everett Lang, standing at the foot of his father's bed, was feeling it for the first time in his adult life, and it was about to rearrange everything he thought he knew about what his money was for. Ada didn't say anything wise. She didn't have a speech. She just patted the empty side of the bed, the way she'd patted 1,000 frightened people toward 1,000 thresholds, and she said the only thing there was to say. "Then come," she said. "Hold his other hand. It is not too late for this one. Come and help me. No one crosses the river alone." And Everett Lang, who had a Gulfstream and a Maybach and a watch worth more than a year of this woman's wages, got down on his knees on a hospital floor next to a cleaning lady and took his dying father's hand and stayed. Walter Lang crossed a little after 4 in the morning. He did not cross alone. What happened in the days after that? What Everett Lang tried to give Ada, and what she said to him when he offered it, is where this story turns into something I did not see coming. Because the man came back with a check, and Ada Okonkwo handed it back to him. He came back 9 days after the funeral, and he came with a check. It was a Saturday afternoon, gray and spitting snow, and Ada was at the kitchen table helping Chitty with long division when the knock came. She knew before she opened the door. She'd been half expecting it the way you expect weather. Everett Lang stood on her landing in a wool coat that probably cost more than her car was worth on its best day, holding a leather folder, looking entirely out of place against the peeling paint and the radiator that banged behind her like a fist. "May I come in?" he said. Not a demand, a request from a man who wasn't used to asking. She let him in. Chitty looked up from her division. took one long, serious look at the visitor, pushed her taped glasses up her nose, and went back to her work, because she had decided long ago that her mother could handle anyone who came through that door. Everett didn't sit until Ada offered the chair. He set the leather folder on the table, opened it, and slid a single piece of paper across to her. A check. Ada looked at the number written on it, and the number was $250,000. "For what you did," he said. "For my father. For coming back when they'd thrown you out. I know about the suspension. I know about the eviction notice. I had someone look into it, and I'm not proud of that, but I needed to understand. This pays everything. The back rent, your daughter's glasses, that exam you can't afford to sit for. All of it, with enough left over that you never have to push a cart again." His voice caught. "Please, let me do this. I have more money than I will ever spend, and I have spent exactly none of it on a single thing that mattered." Ada looked at the check for a long time, and then she picked it up, folded it in half along its crease, and slid it back across the table. "No," she said. Everett blinked at her like she'd spoken in a language he didn't know, which, in a way, she had. "I don't understand." "I know you don't." Ada folded her hands. She was not angry. That was the thing he would remember afterward, that she was not angry at all. Only certain, the way his mother had been certain about things he'd been too young, and then too busy to understand. "Mr. Lang, I sat with your father because where I come from, no one crosses the river alone, not because I wanted anything. The moment I take this, that night becomes something I sold you, and I will not sell you that night. It is the realest thing I have done since I came to this country, and you cannot buy it, because it was already a gift. Then take it for your daughter." "My daughter is watching me right now," Ada said quietly, and she did not look at Chitty, but Chitty's pencil had gone still. "She is learning what her mother is worth, and I will not teach her that the answer is a check from a guilty man." She let that sit. Then her voice softened, and she leaned forward. "You want to do something with all that money? Good. I will tell you what to do with it, but it is not this." Everett Lang, who had built an empire on knowing what people wanted, sat in a cleaning lady's kitchen and discovered he had no idea what came next. "Tell me," he said. "I was a nurse for 19 years, Ada said. A midwife. In Enugu I delivered babies, and I closed the eyes of the dying, and I was somebody. I crossed an ocean, and your country told me my 19 years were worth nothing. Not because I forgot how, because the exam to prove it costs more money than a woman pushing. A cart can never save, and so the skill just sits in my hands going to waste, while your hospitals say they cannot find enough nurses." She tapped the table once. "There are thousands of us. Doctors driving taxis, nurses mopping floors. All that training thrown away because no one will build the bridge." She picked up the wooden boat from where it sat by the salt shaker, the chip on its bow, the new scratch from the parking lot, and she turned it over in her fingers. "And your father," she went on. "He was not the only one. Every night in that hospital there is someone crossing alone. No family. No one to hum. You sat in that hallway 30 nights because you could not bear to watch one man do it. Now imagine the ones nobody is watching at all." Everett looked at the boat in her hand, and then at her face, and something in him that had been clenched for 30 years. Finally, quietly, let go. "My mother," he said, "she cleaned hotel rooms. I built hotels, and I was ashamed of her." He said it plainly, the way you finally set down a thing too heavy to keep carrying. "You're telling me my money was never the gift. The sting was the gift. Now you understand," Ada said. "It only took you 55 years and a stranger on her knees," and she smiled at him, "to take the sting out, because Mode or not, the woman had a little iron in her, and a billionaire who needed to hear one true thing was going to hear it." He left the check on the table. She left it there too. Neither of them touched it again, and somehow that was the moment the whole thing turned. Here is what Everett Lang did with his money. He did not write Ada a check, because she had refused one, and because somewhere in that kitchen he had finally learned the difference between paying and helping. Instead, he called the people who called him when he wanted things built, and he built two things. The first was a program at Carnahan Memorial, and then at 6 more hospitals across Ohio. And the name of it was painted on the wall of everyone. No one crosses alone. Trained volunteers and paid companions on call through the night, so that no patient in those buildings would ever again make the last crossing without a hand to hold. They gave each companion a small token on their first night, something to keep in a pocket. A little wooden boat carved by hand, no longer than a thumb. When the new ones asked what it was for, the answer was always the same. You hold the boat, you stay. Nobody crosses alone. The second thing he built, he named for a midwife in a village he would never see. The Nena Okonkwo Bridge program paid the exam fees, the course fees, the credential reviews, every brick in the wall that stood between a foreign-trained nurse and the work she was already qualified to do. The first class had 31 people in it, a surgeon from Syria, a pediatrician from the Philippines, a nurse from Nigeria who had been pushing a cart for $16.85 an hour. Because here is the quiet cruelty nobody puts on a budget. We let trained healers stock shelves and clean floors while we call it a shortage, and the only thing standing between them and the wards is a fee and a form. It is cheaper, in the end, to build the bridge than to waste the people. It just takes someone deciding that a human being matters more than a process. For most of his life, Everett Lang had been on the wrong side of that math. Now, he wasn't. Ada studied at the kitchen table after Chitty went to sleep, the way she'd watched her grandmother study the old ways by lamplight, and 14 months later, she passed her boards. She did it herself. The program paid the fee, but the 19 years were already in her hands, and the long nights were her own. She caught up the rent before the program money ever cleared, because she would not be a woman who was carried. She bought her daughter a pair of glasses with no tape on them, gold wire frames. Chitty picked out herself, and the first time Chitty put them on and looked across the room and said, "Mama, I didn't know the clock had numbers." Ada had to go stand by the sink for a minute. She works the night shift at Carnahan now, on 4 East, the same floor. She wears scrubs that fit and a badge that says registered nurse. Dale Brunner still pushes his clipboard down the same halls, and when they pass each other, he gives her a short, stiff nod, and she gives him one back, and that is all. Nobody punished him. He was never the disease. He was only a symptom of a building that used to be run on rules instead of people. And the building is different now, and so the rules are too. On the shelf above the nurses' station where the day staff keep their coffee mugs, there's a small, dark wooden boat with a chipped bow. The new nurses ask about it sometimes. Ada tells them it belonged to her grandmother, who was a midwife, who said the same thing on the birthing mat and the deathbed both. And then she goes back to work, because there is always someone on that floor getting ready to cross. One night last winter, near the end of her shift, Ada came around the corner and found a young woman frozen outside room 418. She was barely out of her teens, in environmental services scrubs, a fresh badge, an accent Ada placed in a heartbeat as somewhere in West Africa. She had a cleaning cart and a stricken face, and she was staring through the open door at an old man with no visitors and no flowers, and breathing that Ada knew the sound of from across the hall. "You're not supposed to go in," the young woman whispered when Ada stopped beside her. "They told me. Just clean and leave, don't get involved." Ada looked at her for a long moment, a long, quiet moment. Then she reached into her pocket and took, at a small wooden boat, one of the carved ones, and she pressed it into the young woman's hand and folded her fingers over it, exactly the way her grandmother had once done for her. "Come with me," Ada said. "I'll show you. It's allowed now." She smiled. "Where I come from, we have a saying, 'No one crosses the river alone.'" And the two of them walked into that room together and pulled 2 chairs to the bed, and the circle, which had started with a dying woman in a hotel maid's uniform 30 years before, went on turning. So let me leave you with this. The richest man in this story owned hotels on 3 continents, and the poorest woman owned a wooden boat the size of her thumb. And in the end, it was the boat that changed everything. Money was never the thing. The willingness to stay was the thing. It always was. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. Ada broke the rules. She went into rooms she wasn't allowed in. She risked her job. She came back after they suspended her, all for strangers who could never pay her back. Her supervisor said she was a liability, that the rules existed for a reason, that it wasn't her place. So tell me honestly, was Ada right to break every rule for a dying stranger, or was the supervisor right to stop her? This one will divide the room. Tell me in the comments, and tell me why. Because I read every single one, and if there's a person in your life who stayed when they didn't have to, who held your hand on a hard night and asked for nothing back, send them the story today. Tell them you remember. Then subscribe and turn on the bell. Because next week, I'm bringing you another true-to-life story about the kind of quiet people the world walks right past. This story is a work of fiction. Adias, Everett, Walter, and everyone in it came out of my imagination. But the struggles underneath them are as real as the chair you're sitting in. I wrote this one at my own kitchen table, late after my house had gone quiet. Thinking about an old man I once watched a stranger comfort in a waiting room when I was too afraid to. I never thanked her. So maybe this is me, finally, thanking her. Take care of each other out there, and whoever's crossing near you tonight, don't let them cross alone.